Welcome to another week of the Bible Workshop. Thanks for being here tonight. A couple things before we jump into this week's topic. I wanted to point out the nice little outline and syllabus that we gave out the other day. Turns out that we're not going by this exactly. You probably figured that out already. We did the introduction, of course, observation of the text, identifying the structure of the literature, and then class 4, we skipped that, and we jumped into proper biblical interpretation last time. So the reason why we skipped that is because we were just kind of looking at that week's topic, and we thought that that was being legitimately covered in other weeks. So, we haven't put together the whole class before we're, presenting it on these Wednesday nights. So it's kind of like a week by week thing. And we did the best we could to give you an outline, but inevitably there are a couple changes there. So we skipped that, and then tonight will actually be class number 6, but it's actually week 5, picking a big idea. So that's what's going on there and why we skipped that. Just kind of a quick review on the back of that syllabus there. Of course, we are asking you to pick some character. There's a big list there on the back, a big master list. And we would love for you to practice the things that we're teaching on these Wednesday nights and going through the process of developing a lesson. The big idea is to have several of our men here at Sunset on the Wednesday nights next quarter present that lesson that they've been working on during this class. But even if you're not going to present in front of the church or anything, we'd love for you to pick a character and still go through that process. So just kind of a reminder of that. If you don't have one of these resources, you don't have one of the Bible Workshop Toolkit cards, you can grab one of these after class as well. It has a lot of resources and our 10-step guide to creating a Bible lesson. So if you didn't get one of those, that'll be a good resource for you as well. Any questions from last week? We talked about some keys to proper biblical interpretation. So we talked about several things, keys to interpreting the Bible well, different genres, different things to look out for. Any insights from last week or questions, comments that you'd like to share? There doesn't have to be. Just thought we'd start by asking that. All right, our goal for today is learning how to identify the main point and supporting points in a passage. So here is my question, and this is going to be more of a rhetorical question, okay? A lot of the questions I do want you to answer actually out loud, but we'll just kind of keep this one internal. Have you ever heard a sermon or a class that felt kind of scattered? And what I mean by that is like it was trying to say too many things at once. So maybe you're sitting in a Bible class, or maybe you're sitting in the pews and you're listening to a sermon, and you left wondering, what was the main point of that? I mean, they said a lot of things, but I just don't really know. I'm not really taking anything away from that. It was just kind of a shotgun approach, and a lot of information felt kind of scattered. I think probably all of us have felt that way before. The reason why I don't want you to answer is because I don't want you to be like, yeah, I hear that every Sunday, Philip. I'm wondering what you're talking about. But no, I know I've preached some sermons like that where looking back, I know that maybe it wasn't as focused as it could have been. So the idea that we're teaching tonight is that clear Bible teaching generally has one big idea. So that is our kind of mode of operation. That's kind of the perspective that we're teaching. It doesn't mean that it has to be that way or that it's inherently bad or wrong if it's not that way. But I think in general, clear Bible teaching that is impactful has one big idea, one thing that is communicated. You might think of it like a bullet instead of birdshot, right? Like it's not just a bunch of interesting facts that are thrown out there, but it's one idea that really pierces through that's easy to remember. So why it's important to kind of have one big idea that your lesson is revolving around is one, because it keeps your teaching focused. So everything you say, all the stories that you tell, all the applications that you give, all the explanations that you give of your passage, everything is supporting this one big idea. So what that does is it prevents your lesson from wandering, right? Like whenever we're teaching, preaching, whatever it is, we don't want to be meandering around kind of aimlessly, where whenever we get done, people are like, I don't really know what that was about. So picking one main idea that is a bullet instead of a birdshot kind of helps us stay focused and keeps our lesson from wandering. Another thing that it does, another benefit, is that it aids memory and application. So the people that we are teaching are going to be more likely to remember and apply one single powerful truth rather than 3, 4, 5, 6 kind of scattered, disconnected points. So I'm not saying that a passage can't say many things. You might have a lot to say about a particular passage, but what we're kind of teaching tonight is that a passage can say many things, there can be many details, but we want to kind of pull out one central truth that all of those details kind of surround. Does that make sense? So I want to go through three steps, and I'll give you a couple of examples of how to do this, of how to pick a main point and build a lesson around that main point. So let me pause right there for a second. Are you with me? Are there any questions on that?
This feels scattered.
Does it feel scattered? I thought I gave you the main point, right? I mean,
What was it?
learn how to identify the main points. It's important. That's good. All right, we'll jump in. So step one, identifying the big idea. You've got your passage, you've observed, you've been doing all of these things that we've been talking about. And I think probably, again, this is not the only way to build a lesson, but I think a simple way and a good way to build a lesson is by picking one word that summarizes that passage. Picking one word that is the subject of that passage. Because sometimes the best way to cut through the complexity, because sometimes it's hard to maybe understand everything that a passage is saying. Maybe there's a lot of different things going on in it. Sometimes the best way to cut through that complexity is to identify a single word or maybe a very concise phrase that kind of captures the essence of that passage. So that would be the subject or the theme of that passage. So this word, this single word, is an anchor for building your big idea. It kind of answers the question, what is the author talking about? What is this passage about in one word? That's going to be helpful for identifying a big idea. So I want to give you an example. If you have your Bible tonight, turn to Nehemiah chapter 1. Nehemiah chapter 1. So I want to give you a couple examples. This is from a real sermon that I preached a while back at Sunset, and kind of the process that I went through to identify the big idea in that sermon. So let me read through Nehemiah 1, and as we're reading it, just be thinking, what one word summarizes this text? The words of Nehemiah, son of Hakaliah. During the month of Kislev, in the 20th year, when I was in the fortress city of Susa, Hanani, one of my brothers, arrived with men from Judah, and I questioned them about Jerusalem and the Jewish remnant that had survived the exile. They said to me, the remnant in the province who survived the exile are in great trouble and disgrace. Jerusalem's wall has been broken down, and its gates have been burned. When I heard these words, I sat down and wept. I mourned for a number of days, fasting and praying before the God of the heavens. I said, Lord, the God of the heavens, the great and awe-inspiring God who keeps his gracious covenant with those who love him and keep his commands, Let your eyes be open and your ears be attentive to hear your servant's prayer that I now pray to you day and night for your servants, the Israelites. I confess the sins we have committed against you. Both I and my father's family have sinned. We have acted corruptly toward you and have not kept the commands, statutes, and ordinances you gave your servant Moses. Please remember what you commanded your servant Moses. If you are unfaithful, I will scatter you among the peoples. But if you return to me and carefully observe my commands, even though your exiles were banished to the farthest horizon, I will gather them from there and bring them to the place where I chose to have my name dwell. They are your servants and your people. You redeemed them by your great power and strong hand. Please, Lord, let your ear be attentive to the prayer of your servant and to that of your servants who delight to revere your name. Give your servant success today and grant him compassion in the presence of this man. At that time, I was the king's cupbearer. Okay, so what one word do you think summarizes this passage? And by the way, there's not like one right answer, right? The Spirit might lead each of us to maybe take a slightly different word, not a word that's unfaithful to the meaning of the passage, but maybe a certain aspect of the passage that is literally derived from the text, but some word that maybe God is leading us to pursue, some big idea that maybe the people entrusted to our teaching need to hear about. So what is one word that might summarize this passage? I'll give you mine in a moment.
I think prayer.
Yeah, prayer.
Prayer.
That's a good one.
I was thinking angst.
Yeah.
Angst by the he's in great distress on what's happening, and then injusticeness of it all. And
Yeah, that's good too. Yeah.
Confession.
Confession. That's a great one too. Yep.
Faithfulness. God's faithfulness.
God's faithfulness. Yeah. Yeah. You could pick any of those words. I think those would be legitimate words to build a lesson around in this passage. The word that I went with whenever I built this sermon was brokenhearted. Brokenhearted. So choosing the subject requires discerning what the author is emphasizing, what he's maybe repeating. So here, why I picked the word brokenhearted is because the passage starts with Nehemiah weeping for days, and then that weeping launches the prayer of the rest of the chapter. And really, this weeping and this brokenheartedness kind of launches the rest of the book of Nehemiah and his ministry in Jerusalem, right? So I think that single word, and that's not the only word, but it's one of the words that kind of unlocks the passage's primary focus. So I picked that word, brokenhearted, as the subject. And so let's go to step 2 then. So you turn that word that you've identified in your passage into a big idea sentence. And the way you do that is by identifying, how do I want to say it? The compliment or the assertion. Like what is the author saying about that main word, in other words? So let me see here. So you take the anchor word and you form this big idea sentence, combining the main idea and what the author is saying about it. So my word is brokenhearted in Nehemiah chapter 1. But really the thing that is being said about Nehemiah's broken heart is that he's brokenhearted because of sin. Right? It's not just any kind of brokenheartedness. It's his heart is broken specifically because of sin. So the big idea sentence, kind of combining these two things that I came up with, is a heart that is broken because of sin is fertile soil for God to work with. So that is my big idea of my sermon, of the lesson that I would be preparing here. A heart that is broken because of sin is fertile soil for God to work with. So everything in the lesson that I'm preparing is going to be revolving around that core idea. Before we get to step 3, are you with me? Any questions there? Does that make sense? So the third step, you have your big word, and you have this sentence now that identifies what your lesson is about. But now, your lesson is probably going to have some divisions or some subpoints, some movement. So how do you write those subpoints or identify those lesson divisions? Well, I would say that the big idea, maybe think of it this way, is like the thesis of your lesson, like that's what you're trying to get across, and the supporting points are the major arguments that the biblical author uses to support that main idea or that thesis. So these subpoints come directly from the structure and the flow of the passage. So you're probably asking, how do I find that supporting information, those pieces of information, the details that supports this big idea? Well, I think the best way is to ask this question. How does the author develop and prove the big idea? And if you can't answer that question, like if you've picked one core word and you've developed a big idea sentence, and then you ask the question, how does the author develop and prove this big idea sentence? And you have no idea, you don't see any information in the passage, then you have the wrong word and the wrong big idea, right? Because there should be lots of information that shows how the author develops and proves this big idea that you've extracted from the passage. So let's go back to our example in Nehemiah chapter 1. My big idea is that a heart that is broken because of sin is fertile soil for God to work with. And really the big question I want to look for in the text is, how do we take our broken heart to God to experience that renewal? So whenever I saw it through that lens, brokenheartedness, and how do we leverage that broken heart, how do we give that broken heart to God for God to do something with, I found 4 points in the text. So the first thing that I found is run to the God who's greater. We have to actively go to God with our broken heart. And the reason why that's the first kind of point in the sermon is because in the first part of his prayer, Nehemiah opens up by addressing his words to the Lord, the God of the heavens, the great and awe-inspiring God who keeps his gracious covenant with those who love him. So the first thing I see is that he's taking his brokenness right after he's weeping directly into the presence of God. He doesn't go to other places with his broken heart. He goes directly to God. So that's the first thing that we do. A second point, how do we take our broken heart to God so that he'll do something with it? We get honest about what's broken. Verses 6 and 7. Let your eyes be open and your ears be attentive to hear your servant's prayer, that I now pray to you day and night for your servants, the Israelites. I confess the sins we have committed against you. Both I and my father's family have sinned. We have acted corruptly toward you and have not kept your commands, statutes, and ordinances you gave your servant Moses. So I see in verses 6 and 7, whenever our hearts are broken by sin, we get honest, radically honest about what's broken, confession. So as I kept working my way through the passage, I get to verses 8 through 10, and I see that Nehemiah is holding on to what God has promised. His broken heart is rooted in all of the promises of God. Like that gives him hope that God is going to actually do something with this mourning because of the people's sin. So he talks about how he's like almost reminding God of the promises that he made. So I see that in verses 8 through 10. And then finally, number 4, a fourth point, how do we take our broken heart to God whenever it's been broken because of our sin? We believe that God will make a way. Verse 11. So he talks about how he has this confidence that God is going to give him success in this renewal endeavor. Whenever he goes to the king of Persia, God is going to be working in that situation to bring about spiritual revival. So the way that we bring our broken heart to God is we do all of these things. And the last thing, verse 11, we believe that God is going to make a way for us to experience spiritual renewal. So do you see how you have the big idea and then how the supporting points kind of explain and develop that big idea? Does that make sense? Do you have any questions about that?
So how many points, subpoints, do you recommend be written? It depends on how long the class will be, but on an average class, what would you suggest?
That's a good question. I would say as many as legitimately can be pulled from the passage, you know. I think 4, I mean, it does depend on how much time you have, you know, but I would say the more you have, the more you could kind of wander and the less focused it becomes, you know. So 2, 3, 4 is good. Maybe getting beyond that, you know, maybe it begins to get a little more complicated. But also if there are more supporting points that are holding up kind of your main idea, then, you know, you can have as many as are legitimately found in the passage, I think. So that's a good question. Other questions about that? Is this does this help simplify how to build a lesson? I guess that would be a question as you know, I'm teaching this class. Like, I hope that this is making teaching simple and actionable. That's my goal. Does it help? A quick second example, just to give you another idea of how this could work. Psalm 23. So classic, favorite passage of a lot of people. We won't have to read that one necessarily. But I would say like the main word in that passage, and there could be many, I would say either shepherd or host, maybe, because the metaphor of God changes in that passage. It goes from the Lord is my shepherd, and then towards the end, the Lord is not a shepherd anymore. He is a host. So I would say either shepherd or host would be the main word, the main idea. So then a big idea sentence would be, because the Lord is my shepherd and my host, I can live without fear or want. And then as and this is a message I have preached before, as I went through that passage, looking for ways that passage supports that idea, that the Lord is my shepherd host, I live without fear or want, I found 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So here I was just saying that you know, maybe you don't want a whole lot more than 4, but in this passage I found 6 supporting points, and they were verse 1, since the Lord is my shepherd, I will never lack anything I need. From verse 2, since the Lord is my shepherd, I have the rest and peace my soul longs for. Verse 3, since the Lord is my shepherd, I don't have to wander, I know which way to go. Verse 4, since the Lord is my shepherd, I can face the worst case scenario without being overcome. Verse 5, since the Lord is my host, there's where it shifts, I can endure wounds from others. And verse 6, since the Lord is my host, his love relentlessly pursues me every day. So once you have that big idea and you pull out all of the supporting points that supports that big idea, you're off to the races with having a lesson. I mean, that is the outline of your lesson. So in coming weeks, we will talk about some of the supporting elements. I mean, these are the most important things, right? The big idea, what you're trying to communicate, and the supporting points of how that thing is being talked about. But there's also going to be things we talk about in terms of how to apply it to people's lives, how to, you know, craft an introduction, a conclusion, illustrations. All of those things are important as well. But the main pieces really are what we're talking about tonight, the big idea and also your supporting points. So before I turn it over to Chris, any final questions or comments about how this works? Anything that can be clarified? Yeah.
So for the homework for this week, if I get lost on my processes here, as far as supporting points, do some of the Bible commentaries, they give their ideas of what supporting points are?
Yeah, a good help is looking in like a study Bible or a commentary. really, like we've talked about the ESV Study Bible, it does this. A lot of the time, at the beginning of the book, it will give key themes of that book. So those are good words that are in the theme section of the study Bible to give you some idea about what your passage, big idea word, might be. Now, since that's like the theme of the entire book, you know, you might have to narrow it down a little more in your specific passage. But if you're totally stuck, like I don't even know a big word that, you know, would go with this passage, yeah, I think turning to a study Bible or commentary and, you know, looking for ways that that author says, you know, the theme of this book or this chapter or this section is this. You know, you can build from there if, you know, you need some help. Yes?
So that hold true for when you're doing a person and they're in more than one chapter of a book?
Is it true that you can find one word for that one passage of a person? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, like I'm doing Sarah. So Sarah's, on here it says go to Genesis 18, but Sarah's found in a lot more than just Genesis 18.
Right.
She's found in other chapters of Genesis,
Yeah.
which calls out a lot of her life.
Yes.
So how do you put that together?
Yeah. So the reason why we have it broken down like that is because, you know, Sarah is mentioned, you know, in a lot of different places. But the reason why we put specifically Genesis 18 was just to simplify. Like, if you're going to build a lesson, a lot of the time it's easier just to limit yourself to one particular passage. And it's not to say that you can't, you know, reference other things that we know about Sarah from other passages, but it's going to be harder to pick one big idea that you're trying to get across if you are talking about like 4 different passages, you know. You can do that. You know, we've talked about how those more topical lessons, there is a time and place for that, but kind of the method that we're teaching is that if you limit yourself to, you know, one particular text, then it's easier to say, okay, this passage is trying to communicate this idea. So is that helpful? All right. Anybody else? All right. Thanks a lot.
This is really the steepest part of the hill to climb. It's really where your time spent in reading and sort of meditating and ruminating, and then going over and finding that key word, and then developing that key word into that sentence and those points. And that's really where, you know, creativity comes into play. And then when you see Philip do it, you're like, he made that look really easy. And just remember, he's a professional. He does this every week. And for some of us, it's much harder. You know, if you sort of struggle to write like I do, that process can be a little bit more challenging of developing that thought or developing that sentence and those key points. You might have words, but then you might need to just sort of spend a lot of time sort of crafting those words into what you want that sentence to be and sort of look like. But once you get it, then you'll know it's communicating like almost exactly what you want. And you'll have time. The further you're hopefully you're in this process, you've ruminated, you've studied, you're reading lots of different chapters and getting ideas. You're coming up with keywords and topics and ideas about your character, about your passage, and hopefully that's kind of beginning to make more and more sense to you. So you're thinking maybe already about what your big idea could be. We've spent, you know, hopefully this is where you are. If you haven't started yet, you're fine, but I would encourage you, you know, read your chapter, listen to your chapter, listen to the chapters that surround your character, get caught up, ask those journalistic questions about who's involved, what's going on, the elements of that narrative, those repeated words or phrases, those key topics or ideas, those things to watch out for. If you need to go back and re-watch one of the videos, go ahead and do that. Use the study guide to help cue that in. And especially this one where Philip really unpacks how to write that key sentence and how to develop those key points after that. And it may be a little bit more challenging with your character. It may not, he's like, he picked Nehemiah chapter 1. It's, oh, I can see it, it's so easy there. But my passage is, how do I develop that from my passage? And you might need some help with that. But that's okay, you can get there, you've got plenty of time to do that. Last couple of weeks, we spent time, hopefully you wrote a paragraph that describes the context of your character. So it's the place, the setting, the time frame. We went over that for Daniel. And then last week we also talked about that Bible study, those Bible study questions of interpretation, which were answering those 7 arrows of Bible reading. And what that helps you do is that helps you write out some sentences. And if you go back and read those sentences, you might, some of those sentences are going to be close to the main idea. It's going to be using some of those words. It's going to be using some of those same themes. It might be something similar to that, where you're able to sort of tweak what you have into that main point. So that's what we've been doing. Now I want us to sort of back up and get caught up and sort of reflect again upon Daniel, so that we can hopefully by the end of this class kind of narrow it down about a big idea and maybe what that sentence could look like and what those subpoints could look like. Now remember, there's lots about Daniel. From the very beginning, there's this description about Daniel, about how he's chosen to be into the king's group, to be in the servant pool, and then he obviously gets selected into that group. But there's intelligence and wisdom, he's good looking, there's understanding, there's ability to serve, there's wisdom, there's problem solving, there's interpretation, and then there's this part about what he did. You're able to sort of reflect on of these 6 chapters, the things that he did. He made up his mind. He sought permission. He said, let's test us. He replies with discretion and discernment. He makes requests of the king. He shared with his friends. He prayed for compassion. He goes and speaks to the king. So the reason for writing these things out is so that we can then reflect on and sort of meditate on what type of character he must have to do the things that he did, and to use the words that are described of him here. And hopefully, and to find even to ask ourselves, well, what's motivating him to do what he did and live the life that he lived. And then we're able to see even how God's response to each of these like 5 or 6 little stories of Daniel. At the end, there's always some blessing. There's always something that you sort of see how God reflects upon Daniel's faith. There's some blessing of that. There's some favor of compassion. There's some knowledge or intelligence that's given, or there's some understanding, or he is blessed by the leaders with some title in some way, and ultimately by God. So we've talked about this the last couple of weeks. These 5 stories: king's food, the king's dream of the great statue, the king's dream of the large tree, the handwriting on the wall with King Belshazzar, and then the king's petition, which ends up being for Darius in the lion's den. And this is that setup. These are all these stories, and we're going to try to decide if we're going to pick one or if we're going to deal with them all. This was our context paragraph. Daniel is a major prophet whose life spans the Babylonian captivity, approximately 605 to 538 BC. The book of Daniel begins with Daniel as a youth being placed into King Nebuchadnezzar's personal service. and it ends chapter 1 by saying, as for every matter of wisdom and understanding about which the king consulted them, he found them 10 times better than all the other magicians and conjurers who were in all this realm. And Daniel continued until the first year of Cyrus, the Persian king. These were some of our answers to the 7 arrows of Bible reading. But I wanted to ask you, now that we've just done an overview again of Daniel, what are some themes that seem to jump out at you? What are your thoughts before I share mine? What would be a theme from Daniel that you think?
God's faithfulness.
God's faithfulness. That's a good one. I'll write that down. I didn't have it.
Prayerful.
Prayerful. Strength. Perseverance. Persecution.
Courage.
These are good. Courage. You guys have a bunch that I don't. So this will be good because we all think differently. So I'll show you some of the things that I came up with. From chapter 1, just zeroing in on verse 8. If you remember this from the weeks before, he says, "But Daniel made up his mind that he would not defile himself with the king's choice food or with the wine which he drank. So he sought permission from the commander of the officials that he might not defile himself." So he made up his mind. The footnote says he set upon his heart. There's also a reference there to Leviticus 11:47. I want you to turn over there because I want us to read something that I think might help us. So turn over to Leviticus chapter 11. Verse 47. And it says, "To make a distinction between the unclean and the clean, and between the edible creature and the creature which is not to be eaten." All right, so that's talking about that, the choice food, the king's food. But read before this what's happening. Verse 46, "This is the law regarding the animal and the bird, and every living thing that moves in the waters, and everything that swarms on the earth." Okay. Again, why is Daniel making this? Why has he set this upon his heart? Let's read one verse back. Let's read verse 45. It says, "For I am the Lord who brought you up from the land of Egypt to be your God. Thus you shall be holy, for I am holy." Now, when I read that, it was kind of like a aha moment, because there is something that's motivating Daniel to set upon his heart not to defile himself. And we could sort of come up with whatever we think that is. But to me, it makes a lot of sense that the reason that he chooses not to defile himself because he is set apart and he is pursuing holiness. That is sort of, we're going to see that sort of unpacked. So that would be something to consider. Answers the question of why does Daniel choose not to defile himself? Why does he make that decision firm within his heart? What can you deduce from Daniel's character about this decision? You want to be able to reflect upon that. Another idea might be if you looked at the whole span of his life from chapter 1, verse 8 to essentially chapter 6. Remember, that spans about 50 years, where he begins. There's prayer at the beginning, and then there's prayer then at the end in chapter 6, where he is going into his inner room against the law of the land that's been given, but he knows what it is, that decree from the king, but yet he still goes and prays to God. So he lives a life of prayer and giving thanks. And so you're able to see this whole life modeled of faith, of how he is faithful in all of these things. It made me think of Proverbs 22:6, which is that train up a child, start children off on the way they should go, and even when they are old, they will not depart from it. he decides early on in his life that he is not going to defile himself. He is up in years, and the law of the land says you cannot pray, and he goes and prays anyway. This is modeling this life of faith. So just another idea of how to talk about Daniel. Another idea would be to faith in politics. Consider Daniel's positions. Him being in the king's court, him being in a place of such prominence. He is associated and being a part of the wise men of Babylon. He's the ruler. He's set at either the first position or in the top 3 of positions over the rule of the whole province of Babylon. He's the chief prefect and over all the wise men. So he is given this position of prominence, but yet that is not that they don't believe what he believes. They don't practice the faith that he practices. So how does he do it? And I think that can be really brought out from looking at these stories. How he is able to serve where he served, but yet model his faith. He doesn't seem to sacrifice his faith being in such a worldly place, in the most worldly place. So some other themes of Daniel that are worth considering. I probably am leaning more towards just chapter 1 in view of holiness. I'll come to that in a minute. But holiness, faith, you think about friends or friendship and how significant that was for his friends, how he treated them, how he went to them in prayer when they were all about to receive the death penalty. They all prayed for compassion and they found a way out of that. There's wisdom here. Daniel is blessed greatly with wisdom. He is given a blessing of intellect, but it seems like that grows. And it seems like he has the right things to say at the right time. He's able to have conversations with people who are in charge, and it saves his life, it saves other people's lives, he's able to speak truth. And that really spoke to the word courage. A life of prayer, that's really modeled here. There's a faith in politics. There was someone said God's faithfulness. There's also God's sovereignty. There's a key passage right in the middle that speaks to God's sovereignty. And then there's also an idea of just being present. If you were taken into captivity, would you think about escaping? I would, but he does not. He doesn't. He is faithful in being present in where he is with God's people, and how he does that and why he does that is up to him. So this needs a lot of work, but this is where I came up with from today. Daniel pursued a life of holiness by faith, prayer, and wisdom. And so for us to pursue a life of holiness, we must live by faith, we must have a life full of prayer, we must have a character that displays wisdom. So you can see how it's attaching to a main idea that is coming from the text. It's this life of holiness that he is being set apart. He is not going to be defiled by all the worldliness around him. He doesn't let that happen. Even when there's edicts and decrees that says you cannot pray, he's going to do what's right. And he does that by faith, by prayer, and by wisdom. And there are those examples in each of those stories that sort of bring that out, that sort of illustrate each of those points and how he's in that. So that's just to give you a snapshot. So last week, we were to write a paragraph that described your character's context, and also go through those 7 arrows of Bible reading, and those are on your toolkit guide. So for this next week, what you'll want to do is you want to try to identify the big idea. Now you may have a bunch of them, and you may be sort of wrestling with a bunch of them, and that's okay. Be writing those things out, and Philip gave you a great idea. As you write those things out, maybe some of them aren't going to have the supporting elements, or maybe you're just going to gravitate towards one over the other. Not that they're all bad, but or not that they don't fit, but maybe they all work. But you're going to like one better because it's going to speak to you personally, and those are always really good lessons that are communicated well when they impact us greatly. So try to zero in and identify the big idea, and then add some of those additional points, whether there's 3 or 4 points that are coming from that text or about that character that you can include, or whether there's a few more, however you do that. So, huge thank you for being here. We'll take some questions in just a second.